The light was all wrong. Emma hadn't noticed it at first, not in the chaos of everything else falling apart, but now, sitting alone in the dim corner of the hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning, she couldn't stop staring at her phone screen. The whites were too blue, the yellows too harsh, and something about it made her chest tighten with a panic she couldn't quite name. It was such a small thing, such an impossibly insignificant detail in the grand scheme of what was happening just beyond those double doors, but her mind latched onto it anyway, desperate for something, anything, she could actually fix. Her father was dying. The doctors had said it plainly, without poetry or comfort, just cold medical facts delivered in a tone that suggested they'd had this conversation 1,000 times before. Stage 4, metastatic, weeks, maybe days. Emma had nodded through it all, her face a careful mask of composure while her younger sister Olivia sobbed into their mother's shoulder, but inside she was screaming. Inside, she was 14 years old again, watching her father teach her how to change a tire in the driveway of their old house, his patient hands guiding hers, his voice steady and sure. He had always been the one who could fix anything. The leaking faucet, the broken fence, the time Emma's first boyfriend shattered her heart into what felt like a million irreparable pieces. Her father would sit with her, would listen, would somehow find the exact right words to make the world feel manageable again. And now he was leaving, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Emma looked down at her phone again, at the harsh glare of the screen cutting through the darkness. She'd updated to iOS 17 3 days ago, right before the call came that changed everything, and something had gone wrong with the True Tone feature. The display no longer adjusted to the ambient lighting, no longer gave her that warm, paper-like quality that made late-night reading feel less isolating. It was stuck in this cold, artificial state, and every time she looked at it, she felt a fresh wave of helplessness wash over her. She'd tried everything she could think of in those first few hours at the hospital, when she needed a distraction from the sound of her mother's quiet crying, from the medicinal smell that seemed to seep into her clothes and hair. She'd toggled the setting off and on. She'd restarted the phone twice. She'd checked for updates, recalibrated the display, even factory reset the device in a moment of desperate frustration, but nothing worked. It was just a screen. Just pixels and light and technology that didn't matter, not really, not compared to what was happening to her father. But she couldn't fix him. She couldn't stop the cancer that was eating away at his lungs, couldn't turn back time to catch it earlier, couldn't make the treatments work that had failed so spectacularly. She couldn't fix any of the things that actually mattered. But maybe, just maybe, she could fix this one small, stupid thing. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, and you believe that sometimes we cling to the smallest things when the biggest things feel too overwhelming to face, please take a moment to like this video, to share it with someone who might need to hear this story, to subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling stories about the complicated, messy, beautiful ways we try to hold ourselves together when everything is falling apart. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, what time it is in your corner of the world, because right now, in this moment, we're all here together, and that matters more than you might think. Emma's father, Robert, had been a software engineer before he retired, back when phones still had physical keyboards and the idea of carrying a computer in your pocket seemed like science fiction. He'd taught Emma to code when she was 12, sitting side by side at the old desktop in his study, showing her how problems that seemed impossibly complex could be broken down into logical steps, into sequences of commands that, when executed properly, created something functional and beautiful. He'd taught her that there was always a solution, always a way to debug the errors, always a path forward if you were patient enough and persistent enough to find it. That lesson had shaped everything about who Emma became. She'd gone into user experience design, building interfaces that felt intuitive and warm, that adapted to people's needs and made technology feel less alien, more human. She'd built a successful career on the principle her father had instilled in her, that every problem, no matter how frustrating, had an answer waiting to be discovered. But cancer didn't work like code. There was no debugging death. No sequence of commands that would restore her father to factory settings, no update that would patch the vulnerability that had allowed his cells to turn traitor against him. The waiting room was nearly empty. An older woman dozed in a chair across from Emma, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, her hand still clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. A young couple sat huddled together near the window, speaking in whispers too low to hear, the woman's face streaked with tears that caught the fluorescent light. Emma wondered what brought them here, what crisis had shattered their night, what they were hoping and praying for in the spaces between heartbeats. She wondered if they noticed the lighting, if it bothered them the way it bothered her, or if they were too consumed by their own grief to notice anything as trivial as the quality of light. She opened her phone again, navigating to settings with the automatic muscle memory of someone who'd made this journey 100 times in the past few days. Display and brightness. True tone. The toggle sat there, switched to the on position, mocking her with its refusal to function. She tapped it off, watched the screen grow even colder and harsher, then tapped it back on. Nothing changed. The failure felt personal, felt like one more thing in her life that refused to work the way it was supposed to, one more broken thing she couldn't mend. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss, Zachary, checking in for the third time that night. He'd been understanding when she'd called in that first day, had told her to take all the time she needed, had assured her that the team could handle the product launch without her. But Emma knew how important this launch was, how many months they'd spent refining every detail of the new app they'd built together. She'd been the lead designer, had poured countless hours into ensuring that every interaction felt seamless, that the interface adjusted intelligently to different lighting conditions and user preferences, that it felt warm and welcoming rather than cold and corporate. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent half a year perfecting adaptive display technology for an app while her own phone's basic brightness adjustment sat stubbornly broken. She typed back a quick response, assuring Zachary that everything was fine, that she'd be able to review the final build soon, knowing even as she sent it that it was a lie. Nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. The launch that had consumed her thoughts for months now felt meaningless, felt like arranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Who cared about user experience and interface design when the man who'd taught her to see the world as a series of solvable problems was dying 3 rooms away? The double doors swung open and a nurse emerged, her scrubs decorated with cartoon characters that seemed obscenely cheerful given the setting. She scanned the waiting room, her eyes landing on Emma, and for one horrible moment Emma was certain she was about to deliver the worst news possible. But the nurse just offered a tired smile and said that Robert was asking for her, that he was awake and alert, that Emma could go in if she wanted. Emma wanted. She wanted so badly it hurt, wanted to see her father alive and breathing, wanted to memorize every detail of his face while she still could, wanted to ask him all the questions she'd never thought to ask and hear all the stories she'd never thought to request. She stood, her legs unsteady from sitting too long, and followed the nurse through those heavy doors into the corridor beyond, where the smell of antiseptic grew stronger and the lighting somehow grew even harsher, even more artificial and wrong. Her father looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, swallowed up by the hospital bed, his skin gray and papery in a way that made her stomach clench. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he smiled, and for just a moment he looked like himself again, like the father who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped her with calculus homework and walked her down the aisle at her wedding 2 years ago, before everything fell apart, before the divorce that had left her feeling like a failure at the one thing that was supposed to be forever. "Emma," he said, his voice rough and thin. "You look exhausted. Have you slept at all?" She shook her head, pulling a chair close to his bedside, taking his hand in hers. His fingers felt fragile, like bird bones, nothing like the strong hands she remembered from childhood. "I can't sleep. My brain won't shut off." "I know the feeling," he said, and there was a hint of his old humor in his tone, that dry wit that had always been able to diffuse tension and make difficult moments more bearable. "I've been lying here debugging the universe, trying to figure out where the error in the code is. Why this? Why now? Why me? Did you find anything?" Emma asked, and hated how her voice cracked on the question. "Not yet," Robert admitted. "But I'm starting to think maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe some problems don't have solutions. Maybe some errors are just part of the program, you know. Built into the system, not bugs, features." Emma felt tears burning in her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him, not when he needed her to be strong. But the tears came anyway, hot and angry and filled with all the protest and resistance she'd been holding back for days. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate that I can't fix it. I hate that there's nothing I can do." "You're here," Robert said simply. "That's not nothing." They sat in silence for a while, Emma holding her father's hand, feeling the steady but weakening pulse beneath his papery skin. The monitor beside the bed beeped softly, tracking rhythms that would eventually flatline, that would eventually signal the end of everything that made her father who he was. She couldn't think about that, couldn't let herself imagine a world without him in it. "Your phone," Robert said suddenly, his eyes focusing on the device still clutched in Emma's other hand. The screen looks wrong. Too blue. Emma laughed despite herself, a sound somewhere between humor and hysteria. The True Tone stopped working after the iOS 17 update. I've tried everything to fix it but nothing works. Robert's eyes brightened slightly, the way they always did when presented with a technical problem. Let me see it, Dad, you don't have to. Emma, he interrupted gently. Let me see the phone. Please, let me try to fix something. She handed it over, watching as his fingers, trembling slightly, navigated through the settings with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime solving technical problems. He moved through menus she'd already checked, toggled settings she'd already toggled, his brow furrowing in concentration. For several minutes he worked in silence, and Emma felt something unknot slightly in her chest, watching her father do what he did best, watching him approach a problem with that methodical, patient logic that had always made her feel safe. The sensor might be miscalibrated, he said finally. Or there could be a software conflict. Sometimes when iOS updates, certain features can get corrupted, especially if the update was interrupted or if there was a background process running that interfered with the installation. The True Tone feature relies on the ambient light sensor working in perfect harmony with the display controller, and if there's any miscommunication between those two components, the feature just stops functioning altogether. He continued working, his voice growing stronger as he fell into the familiar rhythm of troubleshooting. First thing to check is whether the sensor itself is working. Go into the accessibility settings, under display and text size, see if there's anything that might be overriding the True Tone function. Sometimes the color filters can interfere, or if you have any reduce white point settings enabled, those can conflict with the automatic adjustment. Emma watched him navigate through settings she hadn't thought to check, hadn't even known existed. Even now, even like this, her father was teaching her, was showing her that there were always more avenues to explore, more possibilities to investigate. She felt a surge of love so intense it was almost painful, mixed with the terrible knowledge that these moments were numbered, that soon there would be no more lessons, no more patient explanations, no more solutions offered in that calm, steady voice. Try this, Robert said, handing the phone back to her. I've disabled some of the accessibility features that might have been conflicting, and I've recalibrated the sensor through the diagnostics menu. Not a lot of people know you can access that, but there's a hidden settings panel you can reach by entering a specific code. Give it a minute to adjust and see if the display starts adapting to the lighting. Emma took the phone, staring at the screen. At first, nothing seemed different. The light was still cold, still harsh, still wrong. But then, slowly, gradually, she watched as the display began to shift, the blues warming to something more natural, the whites softening to something that felt less aggressive, less glaring. The change was subtle but unmistakable. The screen was adapting. The True Tone was working again. You fixed it, she breathed, and the relief she felt was disproportionate to the problem solved, but it crashed over her anyway, overwhelming and absolute. Dad, you actually fixed it. Robert smiled, but there was sadness in it now, a weight that hadn't been there before. I'm glad, he said softly. I'm glad I could fix that for you. I'm glad I could fix one last thing. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication, with acknowledgement of what neither of them wanted to say out loud. Emma set the phone down on the bedside table, the warm, properly calibrated display now feeling like both a gift and an unbearable reminder, and took both of her father's hands in hers. I need you to teach me something else, she said urgently, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I need you to teach me how to do this without you, how to keep going when the person who taught me how to solve problems isn't here anymore. How to face things that can't be fixed. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of Emma's hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. You already know how, he said. You've always known how. I didn't teach you how to solve problems, Emma. I taught you how to approach them. How to break them down. How to stay calm and methodical even when you're scared. But the strength, the persistence, the refusal to give up, that's all you. That's always been you. I don't feel strong, Emma admitted. I feel like I'm falling apart. Strength isn't about not falling apart, Robert said. It's about falling apart and putting yourself back together, over and over again, as many times as it takes. It's about finding the small things you can control when everything else is chaos. It's about fixing a phone screen at 3 in the morning because you need to believe that some things can still be mended, that some problems still have solutions. Emma thought about the past few days, about the hours she'd spent obsessing over her broken display, about how everyone else probably thought she was being ridiculous, wasting time on something so trivial when something so monumentous was happening. But her father understood. He'd always understood. He knew that sometimes you needed to fix the small things to remind yourself that fixing was still possible, that not everything was slipping through your fingers like water. "I'm going to miss you so much," she whispered, and now she let the tears fall freely, let them spill down her cheeks and drip onto their joined hands. "I don't know how to exist in a world where I can't call you when something breaks, where I can't ask you for help." "You'll figure it out," Robert said with quiet certainty. "You'll struggle, and you'll doubt yourself, and sometimes you'll feel lost. But you'll figure it out. That's what we do, Emma. That's what people do. We adapt to new conditions. We adjust to new lighting. We find our way even when the path isn't clear." They talked through the night, Emma and her father, about everything and nothing, about old memories and unfinished dreams, about regrets and gratitudes and all the complicated, messy feelings that come with saying goodbye. Emma told him about the app launch, about the features she was most proud of, about the user feedback that had brought her to tears with its gratitude. Robert told her about the garden he wished he'd planted, about the trip to Ireland he and Emma's mother had planned for their 40th anniversary, about the grandchildren he'd hoped to meet someday. As dawn began to break through the hospital window, painting the room in shades of pink and gold, Emma's phone screen adjusted automatically, warming to match the changing ambient light. The True Tone feature worked perfectly now, seamlessly adapting, and Emma felt a complicated mixture of gratitude and grief watching it function the way it was meant to. Her father had fixed it. He'd solved the problem when she couldn't. He'd given her one last solution, one last lesson, one last gift of functionality and order in a world that felt increasingly chaotic and broken. Over the following weeks, as her father's condition deteriorated, as the family gathered for those final, precious days, Emma found herself returning again and again to those hours in the hospital room, to that conversation about strength and adaptation and fixing what could be fixed while accepting what couldn't. She helped her mother make arrangements, held her sister as they picked out the casket, delivered a eulogy that somehow captured both the enormity and the everyday beauty of her father's life. And through it all, she carried her phone with its perfectly functioning True Tone display, and every time she looked at it, every time she watched the screen adjust to match the lighting around her, she felt her father's presence, felt his patient guidance, felt his reminder that she had everything she needed to face what came next. The app launched on schedule, to reviews that praised its intuitive design and adaptive interface. Emma read them from her childhood bedroom at her mother's house, where she'd stayed in those first raw weeks after the funeral, and felt a bittersweet pride. Her father would have been proud, would have understood what she'd built and why it mattered, would have seen how she'd taken his lessons about breaking down complex problems and applied them to creating something that made people's lives just a little bit easier, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more manageable. She started having